Commander Jake Sullivan was drinking his morning coffee when the message arrived. He sat in his small office aboard the TDF Horizon, watching the stars drift past through the viewport. The coffee was real Earth coffee, not the synthetic stuff. They served in the mess hall. It was one of the few luxuries he allowed himself during long patrol missions in the outer rim of human space. The communication alert beeped 3 times, indicating priority transmission from Terra Command. Jake set down his cup and activated the secure channel. Admiral Lisa Carter's face appeared on the screen, her expression grim. Behind her, Jake could see the busy operations center at Terra Command headquarters on Earth. "Jake, we have a situation," Lisa said without preamble. "The Galactic Council has sent us an ultimatum. They want humanity to surrender unconditionally and submit to integration into their collective within 30 standard days." Jake felt his stomach drop. A Galactic Council ruled over most of the known galaxy. 47 different alien species bowed to their authority. Their fleets numbered in the millions of ships. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. And now they wanted Earth. What are their terms? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Complete submission," Lisa replied. "Humanity becomes a client. Species under council oversight. Our military forces are disbanded. Our government structure is replaced by council administrators. Our people are relocated to designated worlds within council space. In exchange, they promise we won't be exterminated." Jake leaned back in his chair. He had expected this day would come eventually. Humanity had been expanding into space for 3 centuries now. They had established colonies on dozens of worlds and built a modest fleet of warships. But compared to the vast Galactic Council, they were nothing more than upstart newcomers. "Have you seen the Council fleet compositions?" Jake asked. Lisa nodded and transmitted a data file to his terminal. Jake opened it and felt his blood run cold. The Centauri hegemony alone possessed battle cruisers that were 10 times larger than humanity's biggest ships. Each Centauri vessel carried enough firepower to level a city. The crystalline Vorthake had perfected energy weapons that could slice through human armor like paper. The insectoid Kythera operated in perfect coordination, their hive fleets moving as single organisms. "They're giving us 30 days to make our decision," Lisa continued. "But Jake, I don't think they expect much resistance. The Council has integrated over 24 species in the past millennium. Every one of them eventually submitted without a fight." Jake studied the tactical data flowing across his screen. The numbers were overwhelming. Humanity possessed roughly 3,000 military vessels of various sizes. The Council could field over 2 million ships if they chose to. Human technology was solid, but unremarkable. Council technology included faster-than-light communication, matter conversion, and weapon systems that humanity barely understood. "What does Earth Command want me to do?" Jake asked. "Keep your fleet on patrol status for now," Lisa replied. "President Morrison is convening the Global Defense Committee. We'll have an answer within 72 hours. The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the endless stars. Somewhere out there, vast alien fleets were probably already moving toward human space. The Council was confident, perhaps overconfident. They had never encountered serious resistance before Jake activated his personal terminal and began reviewing everything humanity knew about the Council species. The Centauri were the military backbone of the Council. They valued strength above all else and respected only those who could prove their power in combat. Their society was built around warrior castes, with the strongest ruling over the weak. Vorthik were different. They were pure logic creatures, making decisions based on mathematical calculations and efficiency algorithms. Emotion was considered a weakness in Vorthak culture. They saw the universe as a vast equation to be solved, with themselves as the ultimate solution. The Kithera fascinated Jake the most. They were a hive-mind species where individual identity was completely submerged into the collective consciousness. No single Kithera made decisions for themselves. Everything was decided by the group mind, and every member carried out their assigned role without question or complaint. These three species formed the core of Council leadership, but there were dozens of others. Each had submitted to Council authority and accepted their place in the galactic hierarchy. None had ever successfully resisted integration. Jake called up historical records of previous Council integrations. The pattern was always the same. The Council would identify a new spacefaring species and send an ultimatum. Most species submitted immediately upon seeing the size of Council fleets. Those few who chose to fight were quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. Within a generation, the integrated species would be completely absorbed into Council culture. But as Jake read through the reports, something began to bother him. The Council seemed to approach every integration the same way. They made the same assumptions about every species they encountered. They expected fear, submission, or desperate resistance. They had never dealt with a species that responded differently. Jake opened a secure channel to his senior officers. Captain Mary Johnson commanded the cruiser TDF Liberty. Commander Bill Parker led the destroyer squadron. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Wilson commanded the Marine contingent. Within minutes, all three appeared on his screen from their respective ships. "I assume you've all received the briefing from Terra Command," Jake began. "Yes, sir," Mary replied. "The Council wants us to surrender everything." "What are your thoughts?" Bill Parker spoke first. "Sir, we can't win a conventional fight. Their smallest battle group outnumbers our entire fleet. Their technology is superior to ours in every measurable way." Kate Wilson nodded in agreement. "The Marines are ready to fight, sir, but we'd be facing impossible odds. Even if we inflicted casualties, they could replace their losses easily. We can't." Jake had expected these responses. His officers were thinking like military professionals, analyzing the situation in terms of ships, weapons, and tactical advantages. But Jake was beginning to think differently. What if we don't fight them the way they expect? He asked. Mary looked confused. "Sir, what do you mean?" "The Council has integrated 47 species," Jake explained. "Every single one either submitted immediately or fought conventional wars that they lost quickly. The Council has never encountered a species that responded in an unexpected way." Jake pulled up the psychological profiles his intelligence staff had compiled on Council species. Look at their patterns. The Zentari respect strength, so they expect their enemies to either show strength or show weakness. The Vorthic think logically, so they expect logical responses to their ultimatums. The Kithera work collectively, so they assume other species will make collective decisions. "But humans don't always follow those patterns," Kate said slowly. "Beginning to understand." "Exactly," Jake replied. "We're individuals who make individual choices. We ask questions that don't have logical answers. We find strength in unexpected places. The Council has never dealt with a species quite like us." Jake began formulating an idea. It was crazy, probably impossible, and definitely not anything taught in military academies. But as he studied the Council's history, he realized they had one crucial weakness. They had become comfortable with predictability. They expected every species to react the same way. "I want all ships to maintain current patrol positions," Jake ordered. "But I also want detailed psychological assessments of every Council species we've encountered. I want to know how they think, what they value, and what questions they've never been asked." His officers looked puzzled, but they accepted their orders. As the transmission ended, Jake returned to his viewport. The stars looked the same as always, but everything had changed. Humanity faced the greatest threat in its history. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to turn that threat into an opportunity. The Council expected humanity to behave like every other species they had encountered. Jake Sullivan was beginning to think that might be their biggest mistake. President Helen Morrison had not slept in 36 hours. She sat at the head of the long table in the secure bunker beneath Geneva, surrounded by the most powerful people on Earth. The Global Defense Committee had been in continuous session. Since receiving the Council's ultimatum, and tensions were running higher with each passing hour. General Peter Hayes drummed his fingers on the table while studying fleet deployment charts. Admiral Lisa Carter reviewed intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations. Intelligence Director Sam Rodriguez worked through psychological profiles of Council species on his tablet. Each person in the room carried the weight of humanity's future on their shoulders. The numbers don't lie, General Hayes said for the third time that day. We have 3,000 ships. They have over 2 million. We have fusion weapons. They have planet crackers. This isn't a fight we can win through conventional means. Secretary of State Robert Chon leaned forward. Then we negotiate. Find out what they really want. Maybe we can reach some kind of compromise. There is no compromise, Admiral Carter replied sharply. I've read every Council integration in the past 500 years. They don't negotiate. They don't make deals. You submit completely, or they destroy you completely. President Morrison rubbed her temples. The weight of 3 billion human lives pressed down on her. Every decision she made in the next few hours would determine whether humanity continued to exist as a free species or became another footnote in Council history. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The wall screen activated to show Commander Jake Sullivan calling from his flagship in the Outer Rim. His face looked tired but determined. Madam President, I have a recommendation, Jake said without waiting for pleasantries. Go ahead, Commander. Morrison replied, Don't surrender, but don't fight either. The room fell silent. General Hayes looked incredulous. Commander, what exactly are you suggesting? Jake's image shifted as he moved closer to his camera. I've been studying Council integration patterns for the past 2 days. Every species they've encountered has made the same basic choice. Submit immediately or fight a conventional war. The Council has never dealt with a species that chose a third option. What third option? Morrison asked. We make them think we're submitting while we do something they've never seen before, Jake explained. We ask questions they can't answer. We plant ideas they can't control. We make them question everything they believe about themselves and each other. Intelligence Director Rodriguez looked up from his tablet. Commander, are you talking about psychological warfare? I'm talking about something deeper than that, Jake replied. The Council species have been stable for centuries. They don't change. They don't adapt. They follow the same patterns their ancestors followed 1,000 years ago. But humans are different. We ask why. We wonder what if. We imagine things that don't exist yet. Dr. Marie Dubois entered the conference room carrying a thick folder of research papers. She was Earth's leading expert on alien psychology and had spent the past day analyzing everything humanity knew about Council species behavior patterns. I apologize for being late, she said, taking a seat near the president. But I think Commander Sullivan is on to something important. Morrison gestured for her to continue. I've been studying the psychological profiles of major Council species, Dr. Dubois explained. The Zentari culture is built around dominance hierarchies. The strongest rule the weak. But their definition of strength is very narrow. Physical power, military might, technological superiority. They've never encountered a species that defined strength differently. She opened her folder and pulled out several charts. The Vorthik pride themselves on pure logic and emotional control. But logic built on false assumptions leads to false conclusions. They've never been forced to examine their basic premises about reality. And the Kithara? Morrison asked. The most interesting case, Dr. Dubois replied. They've eliminated individual identity completely. Every Kithara thinks the same thoughts and makes the same decisions. But they've never been exposed to the concept of individual choice. They don't even have words for personal preference or individual desire. General Hayes looked skeptical. Doctor, how does any of this help us avoid getting blown to pieces by Council fleets? Dr. Dubois smiled. Because ideas are more powerful than weapons, General. The Council has conquered dozens of species through superior firepower. But they've never tried to conquer a species that fights back with superior ideas. President Morrison was beginning to understand. You're talking about ideological warfare. Exactly, Jake said from the screen. We can't outfight them, but we might be able to outthink them. Admiral Carter leaned back in her chair. This is insane. You want to defeat a galactic empire with philosophy? Not defeat, Dr. Dubois corrected. Transform. We don't need to destroy the Council. We need to change it so fundamentally that it can no longer function as a unified threat. Morrison stood and walked to the large map of known space that covered one wall of the conference room. Council territory was marked in red, covering roughly 60% of the galaxy. Human space was a tiny blue dot on the outer rim. How would this work practically? She asked. Jake's voice came from behind her. We use our greatest advantage. Humans are natural storytellers. We ask questions nobody else asks. We imagine possibilities nobody else sees. We take ideas that seem impossible and make them real. The Council expects us to either submit or fight, Dr. Dubois added. They have procedures for both scenarios. But they have no procedures for dealing with a species that responds by asking fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. Intelligence Director Rodriguez closed his tablet and looked around the room. I've been monitoring Council communications since we received their ultimatum. Their internal messages show complete confidence. They expect this integration to proceed exactly like all the others. Standard 30-day ultimatum, followed by either immediate submission or brief military resistance, which means they're not prepared for anything different. Morrison realized that the room fell quiet as everyone considered the implications. It was a desperate plan, probably impossible to execute, and likely to fail catastrophically. But it was also the only plan that offered any hope of preserving human independence. General Hayes spoke first. Madam President, if we're going to try this, we need to start immediately. The Council is probably already moving fleets toward our space. Morrison returned to her seat. Dr. Dubois, I want you to head up a team of psychologists, philosophers, and social scientists. Your job is to identify the fundamental assumptions that keep Council society stable. Find their weak points. Yes, Madam President. Admiral Carter, coordinate with Commander Sullivan. I want our fleets positioned defensively, but not provocatively. We need to look like we're considering submission. Understood. Mr. Rodriguez, monitor all Council communications. I want to know how they're reacting to everything we do. Morrison looked around the table at the faces of humanity's leadership. In a few hours, they would either begin the most audacious campaign in human history or condemn their entire species to slavery. We're going to try to change the galaxy by teaching it how to think differently, she said quietly. God help us all. The meeting continued for another 6 hours, planning the details of humanity's response to the Council ultimatum. But the fundamental decision had been made. Humanity would not surrender. They would not fight. They would do something the galaxy had never seen before. They would ask questions that had no easy answers and plant ideas that could not be contained. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Brooks had never imagined that her job would involve starting a revolution across the galaxy. She stood in the hidden communication center buried deep beneath Luna's surface, watching dozens of technicians prepare the most important broadcast in human history. The facility had been built in secret 5 years earlier as a backup command center, but now it would serve a very different purpose. Amy looked at the list of names on her tablet. These were not soldiers or politicians or scientists. They were ordinary people from Earth who had volunteered to help save humanity by simply being themselves. Dr. Kevin Park was a philosophy professor from Seoul who spent his free time wondering about the nature of existence. Teacher Nancy Williams from Denver had a gift for asking questions that made people think in new ways. 8-year-old Lucy Anderson from Phoenix was curious about everything and never accepted simple answers. Are we ready to begin transmission? Amy asked her chief technician. Sergeant Tom Murphy checked his instruments one final time. All systems are green, Colonel. We have clear channels to every major council communication network. They won't be able to block these signals without shutting down their entire galaxy-wide information system. Amy nodded and activated the first broadcast. Dr. Kevin Park appeared on screens across council space, sitting in a simple chair with Earth visible through a window behind him. His voice was calm and friendly, like a teacher talking to students. "Hello," Kevin said to the billions of alien beings who are now watching him. "My name is Kevin Park, and I am a human from the planet Earth. I have been thinking about something that puzzles me, and I hope you might help me understand it better." On the Zentari homeworld, military commanders paused their war planning to listen to this strange human. Kevin continued speaking in his gentle voice. "I have been studying your culture, and I am confused about something. You say that strength determines worth, that the strongest should rule over the weaker. But I noticed that your greatest warriors often serve under administrators who could never defeat them in combat. If physical strength is what matters most, why do strong people obey weak people?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Zentari warriors across their empire suddenly found themselves thinking about something they had never questioned before. Why did the mightiest fighters take orders from bureaucrats who had never held a weapon? Their entire social system was built on the idea that strength ruled, but the reality was far more complicated. Amy switched to the second broadcast. Nancy Williams appeared on screen, sitting in her classroom with children's artwork covering the walls behind her. Her warm smile made her seem completely harmless, which made her words even more devastating. "I teach children on Earth," Nancy said, "and children ask the most wonderful questions. Today I want to ask a question that one of my students asked me about your Vorthic friends." The crystalline beings of the Vorthic hierarchy listened with their typical emotionless attention. Logic was everything to them. Emotion was weakness. Efficiency was the highest virtue. "My student wanted to know about your government structure." Nancy continued, "You have 17 different levels of administration between local decision makers and central command. Each level reviews and approves decisions from the level below. You say this ensures logical accuracy, but my student wondered why logical beings would need so many checks and double checks. If your logic is perfect, wouldn't one review be enough? And if your logic isn't perfect, how do you know the reviewers are any more logical than the original decision makers?" Across Vorthic space, administrators suddenly found themselves questioning the very foundations of their society. They had built layer upon layer of bureaucracy to ensure logical perfection, but no one had ever asked whether the system itself was logical. Amy activated the third broadcast, the one she knew would cause the most chaos. 8-year-old Lucy Anderson appeared on screen, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor with stuffed animals arranged around her. Her innocent eyes looked directly into the camera. "Hi there," Lucy said with the casual friendliness that only children possessed. "I learned about the Kithra people in school today, and I have some questions. My teacher says you all think the same thoughts and make the same decisions together. That sounds really organized, but I was wondering about something." The Kithra hive minds focused their collective attention on this small human child. Individual. Kithra drones across thousands of worlds stopped their assigned tasks to listen. "Don't you ever want to choose something just for yourself?" Lucy asked. "Like, maybe you want chocolate ice cream, but everyone else wants vanilla? Or maybe you want to paint a picture, but the group mind says you should do math instead. Don't you ever feel sad that you never get to decide what you personally want to do?" The question struck the Kithra collective consciousness like lightning. Individual drones across their empire suddenly experienced something they had no words for. Personal desire. Individual preference. The wish to make their own choices about their own lives. Captain Tony Rodriguez monitored Council communications from his stealth ship hidden in the asteroid belt of an uninhabited system. The intercepted messages showed immediate and dramatic effects from the broadcasts. Centauri military units were reporting discipline problems as warriors questioned their orders. Vorthic administrative centers were experiencing delays as bureaucrats demanded logical justification for procedures they had followed without question for centuries. Most dramatically, individual Kithra drones were beginning to act independently of their hive minds for the first time in their species' history. "Colonel Brooks," Tony transmitted to Luna Base, "you need to see these intercepts. It's working even better than we hoped." Amy reviewed the intelligence reports with growing amazement. The simple questions posed by ordinary humans were causing fundamental disruptions across Council space. But the most important effect was what happened next. The questions didn't stop with the original broadcasts. Council species began asking the same questions of each other. Centauri warriors demanded explanations from their weak administrators. Vorthic bureaucrats questioned the logic of their own systems. Kithra drones began expressing individual thoughts and desires. Dr. Marie Dubois had predicted this would happen. "Ideas were infectious," she had said. "Once you plant a question in someone's mind, they can't stop thinking about it. And when they try to answer it, they often discover that their entire worldview was built on assumptions they had never examined." Amy watched the communication intercepts flowing across her screens. Council military commanders were requesting guidance from their political leaders. Political leaders were demanding advice from their philosophers and scientists. But the philosophers and scientists were struggling with the same questions that ordinary humans had asked with such innocent simplicity. The broadcasts continued throughout the day. A farmer from Iowa asked the Vorthic why they valued efficiency over happiness. A teenager from Lagos wondered why Centauri society was so afraid of weakness that they never allowed anyone to show vulnerability. An elderly man from Tokyo asked the Kithra if they had ever considered that collective thinking might prevent the discovery of new ideas. Each question was simple. Each question was devastating. Each question planted seeds of doubt in the minds of beings who had never doubted anything before. Amy received a priority transmission from Terra Command. President Morrison appeared on her screen, looking exhausted but hopeful. "Colonel, what's the status of the operation?" "Beyond our best expectations, Madam President," Amy replied. "Council communications are showing massive disruptions. Their species are questioning fundamental aspects of their own societies. Some Kithra hive worlds are reporting complete communication breakdowns as individual drones refuse to follow collective directives." Morrison smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "Keep broadcasting, Colonel. It appears that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology or our military might. It's our ability to ask the questions that no one else thinks to ask." Amy returned to her work, coordinating the next wave of broadcasts. Ordinary humans would continue speaking to the galaxy, asking simple questions that had no simple answers. And across council space, billions of alien beings would continue struggling with concepts they had never considered before. The 30-day ultimatum was half over, but the council was no longer focused on integrating humanity. They were too busy trying to hold their own civilizations together as the questions spread like wildfire across the stars. Ambassador Claire Thompson had never felt smaller than she did standing in the docking bay of the council's primary station. Her single diplomatic vessel looked like a toy next to the massive alien ships that filled the enormous space. Zentari. Warships bristled with weapons that could level mountains. Vorthic science vessels hummed with energy that bent light around their crystalline hulls. Kythera transport ships moved in perfect formation like schools of mechanical fish. Claire adjusted her simple blue diplomatic uniform and picked up her datapad. She carried no weapons, no advanced technology, no protection beyond her diplomatic immunity. Her only tools were words and the intelligence reports that Major Chris Evans had compiled over the past 29 days. The council had not invited her to their station. In fact, they had explicitly forbidden any human from entering council space. But Claire's ship had somehow bypassed every security system, every sensor network, every defensive measure that protected the most important location in the galaxy. When challenged by council patrols, she had simply transmitted a message saying she wished to address the council about humanity's response to their ultimatum. The confusion this caused was immediate and overwhelming. No species had ever ignored council security before. No one had ever simply shown up uninvited to the primary station. The council's protocols had no provision for dealing with such unprecedented behavior. Delegation of council guards met Claire as she stepped off her ship. The Zentari warriors towered over her, their battle armor gleaming with decorative kills from a dozen different wars. The Vorthic representatives moved with the precise efficiency of living machines. The Kythera drones stood in perfect formation, their compound eyes reflecting the station's harsh lights. "Human ambassador," the lead Zentari growled, "you have violated council space without permission. You will be detained pending decision on your fate." Claire smiled politely. "I understand your concern, but I'm here to deliver humanity's official response to the council's generous offer of integration. Surely the council would want to hear our decision before taking any hasty actions." The guards exchanged glances. This was not how previous species had behaved. Usually, species either submitted before the deadline or prepared for war. No one had ever come to deliver their response in person like this was some kind of diplomatic negotiation. After several hours of heated discussion among council leadership, Claire was escorted to the great council chamber. The massive spherical room contained representatives from all 47 council species. Thousands of beings filled the tiered seating that surrounded a central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. The chamber fell silent as Claire walked to the center platform. She could feel the weight of alien gazes from every direction. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with contempt, many with confusion. Humans were supposed to be a minor species facing inevitable integration. They were not supposed to appear as confident ambassadors in the heart of council power. Council Speaker Theron, an ancient Vorthic whose crystalline body had darkened with age, activated the chamber's translation system. "Human representative, you stand before the Galactic Council in violation of our direct orders. Explain your presence." Claire activated her datapad and began to speak in a clear, calm voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "Honored council members, I come to thank you for your generous offer to integrate humanity into your magnificent civilization." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. This was not the desperate pleading or angry defiance they had expected. However, Claire continued, After careful consideration, humanity must respectfully decline her offer. We appreciate the thought, but we prefer to remain independent. The murmur became an uproar. Species did not decline council integration. The concept was unthinkable. Council Speaker Theron raised a crystalline hand for silence. Human, you do not seem to understand your situation. The council's offer was not a request. It was a command. You will submit or face the consequences. Claire nodded respectfully. I understand your position, honored speaker. But before humanity makes its final decision, I thought you might be interested in what we learned about the council during our 29 days of observation. She began to speak about each council species with the calm objectivity of a scholar presenting research findings. But her words carried devastating implications. We studied the Zentari military structure, Claire said, looking directly at the Zentari delegation. Your warrior culture is built on the principle that strength determines leadership. But we noticed something interesting. Your greatest warriors have been questioning their orders for the past 3 weeks. They want to know why they should obey. Leaders who could never defeat them in combat. Some warrior units have stopped following commands entirely. The Zentari delegates shifted uncomfortably. This information was supposed to be classified, known only to their highest military commanders. Claire turned to the Vortex section. Your logical systems are truly impressive. 17 levels of bureaucratic review to ensure perfect decision making, but we observed some inefficiencies. Your administrators are now demanding logical justification for procedures they followed automatically for centuries. Processing times for routine decisions have increased by 400%. The Vorthic representatives exchanged rapid communication bursts, their crystalline bodies flickering with data exchange. This human somehow knew details about their internal operations that should have been impossible to obtain. But Claire's most devastating observations were reserved for the Kithera. Your collective consciousness is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Council civilization. Perfect unity of thought and purpose. But we noticed some unusual developments. Individual drones on 73 different worlds have begun making personal choices independent of hive mind directives. Some have even requested individual names. The Kithera delegation fell completely silent. Individual identity was the greatest heresy in their culture, something that had not happened in over 1,000 years. As Claire spoke, council species began looking at each other with new suspicion and uncertainty. The human was not threatening to exploit these weaknesses. She was simply acknowledging that she knew about them, speaking as casually as if she were discussing the weather. Major Chris Evans had done his work well. His intelligence teams had spent 29 days studying council civilizations with human eyes, seeing patterns and problems that the aliens themselves had become blind to. Every social structure had flaws. Every government had contradictions. Every species had questions they had stopped asking centuries ago. We also noticed some interesting interactions between council species, Claire continued. The Zentari respect the Vorthic's logical abilities, but privately wonder if pure logic leads to emotional sterility. The Vorthic admires Zentari military efficiency, but question whether strength-based hierarchies are truly logical. The Kithera envy both species for their individual achievements, though they would never admit this desire for personal recognition. Council delegates were now staring at each other with open suspicion. Alliances that had existed for centuries suddenly seemed fragile. Trust that had never been questioned was now full of doubt. Claire reached the end of her presentation and closed her datapad. Humanity thanks the Council for this educational opportunity. We learned so much about galactic civilization during our brief observation period. We hope our questions and observations have been equally educational for you. She turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, and before I forget, humanity officially declines your integration offer. We'll be returning to our own space now. Thank you for your time." The council chamber erupted in chaos as Claire walked calmly toward the exit. Delegates were shouting at each other in dozens of different languages. Ancient alliances were cracking under the weight of newfound suspicions. Species that had worked together for millennia were suddenly questioning each other's motives and methods. Council Speaker Theron's voice cut through the noise. "Human ambassador, you cannot simply leave. The council has made its decision regarding your species." Claire turned back with that same polite smile. "Of course you have. But I think you'll find that the council has more pressing matters to attend to now. Thank you again for this enlightening exchange." As Claire's ship departed the station, emergency sessions were already being called across council space. The questions that humanity had planted were bearing fruit, and the harvest was chaos. Dr. Paul Martinez had predicted this moment with mathematical precision. He sat in his office at Terra Command, watching the council's official response arrive exactly when his calculations said it would. The message was brief, angry, and exactly what humanity had wanted to hear. The council declared humanity a threat to galactic stability. All human ships were banned from council space. Any council species caught communicating with humans would face severe penalties. Trade with humanity was forbidden. Contact with humanity was forbidden. The council wanted nothing to do with the dangerous ideas that humans carried. President Helen Morrison read the message aloud to the assembled Global Defense Committee. "The Galactic Council hereby declares the human species persona non grata throughout council space. Any human vessel entering council territory will be destroyed without warning. Any council species providing aid or comfort to humans will be considered in violation of galactic law." General Peter Hayes shook his head in amazement. "They're doing exactly what we wanted them to do." Admiral Lisa Carter smiled for the first time in weeks. "They think they're punishing us by cutting off contact. They don't realize they're too late." 6 months had passed since Ambassador Claire Thompson's visit to the council station. 6 months since humanity had been declared enemies of galactic civilization. But in those 6 months, the questions that humans had asked continued spreading across the galaxy like a virus that the council could not contain. Commander Jake Sullivan, recently promoted to admiral, stood on the observation deck of his flagship as it patrolled the edge of human space. His long-range sensors detected something that should have been impossible. A small convoy of alien ships was approaching from council space, broadcasting human communication codes. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "were receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. They're requesting permission to enter human space for trade negotiations." Jake smiled. This was the 17th such request they had received this month. Granted. Escort them to Station Alpha. The lead ship belonged to a species called the Nexari, a member of the council for over 800 years. Their captain appeared on Jake's screen, his four-armed form clearly nervous about violating council directives. "Admiral Sullivan," the alien captain said, "my government has authorized me to establish trade relations with humanity. We understand this violates council law, but we believe the council's decision was made in error." Jake nodded diplomatically. "Captain, humanity welcomes peaceful trade with all species. What does your government hope to exchange?" The Nexari captain hesitated before answering. "We want to trade for human ideas, Admiral. Your concepts of individual freedom and personal choice have spread to our world. Our people are demanding political reforms that our current government cannot provide. We need to understand how democratic systems function before our society collapses entirely." This was happening across the galaxy. The questions that ordinary humans had asked were causing fundamental changes in dozens of council species. The Centauri warrior class had demanded political representation. leading to the first elected civilian government in their history. 3 Vorthek worlds had declared independence, claiming their local governments were more logical than the central. Bureaucracy. The Kithra were experiencing something unprecedented. Individual drones were forming personal relationships and making independent life choices. Intelligence. Director Sam Rodriguez briefed President Morrison on the latest developments. Madam President, we now have confirmed contact with 23 council species that are seeking trade or diplomatic relations with humanity. All of them are experiencing internal political upheaval, triggered by exposure to human ideas. Morrison studied the galactic map on her office wall. Red markers showed council worlds experiencing political instability. Blue markers indicated species that had secretly contacted humanity. The pattern was clear and accelerating. What's the council's response to these developments? Morrison asked. They're trying to maintain unity through increasingly authoritarian measures, Rodriguez replied. But every action they take to suppress human ideas just makes those ideas more attractive to their member species. Dr. Marie Dubois entered the office carrying her latest analysis of council communications. Madam President, I think you need to see this. The council leadership is fragmenting. The Zentari military command wants to crush the rebellions with force. The Vorthik administration is demanding logical solutions to what they see as logical problems. The Kithara collective minds are struggling to process the concept of individual dissent within their own populations. Morrison read through the intercepted communications with growing amazement. The mighty Galactic Council, which had ruled the galaxy for over 2 millennia, was falling apart from internal contradictions that humans had simply pointed out. They never learned how to handle disagreement, Dr. Dubois explained. For centuries, they maintained unity through the assumption that their way was the only logical way. But once their member species started asking basic questions about authority and individual rights, that assumption collapsed. Admiral Jake Sullivan received reports from deep space monitoring stations throughout human territory. Council fleets were still massive and technologically superior, but they were no longer unified. Some battle groups were enforcing council directives with increasing brutality. Others were quietly ignoring orders that violated the individual rights of council citizens. A few had openly defected to join rebel movements on their home worlds. The transformation was accelerating beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as simple questions asked by ordinary humans had become a galaxy-wide movement for individual freedom and democratic government. Species that had never heard of concepts like personal liberty or representative democracy were now demanding both. President Morrison addressed the United Earth Assembly 1 year after the Council's ultimatum. She stood before representatives from every nation on Earth, but her words were also being broadcast secretly to billions of beings across the galaxy. 1 year ago, the Galactic Council demanded our surrender, Morrison said. They wanted humanity to abandon our independence and submit to their authority. Today, I can report that humanity remains free and independent. But more importantly, the ideas of freedom and independence are spreading to every corner of the galaxy. She gestured to the star map behind her, now showing dozens of worlds in various stages of democratic revolution. The Council still exists, but it no longer rules through consensus. Its member species are demanding the same rights that humans have always considered basic: the right to think for yourself, the right to make your own choices, the right to question authority. Morrison paused to let her words sink in. Humanity won this conflict not through superior weapons or military strategy. We won by teaching the galaxy that there are alternatives to the way things have always been done. We showed them that individuals matter, that questions are valuable, that change is possible. Admiral Jake Sullivan watched the broadcast from his flagship as it patrolled the ever-expanding border between human space and the fragmenting Council territory. Behind him lay Earth and humanity's growing sphere of influence. Ahead lay a galaxy, where human ideas were reshaping civilizations that had remained unchanged for millennia. The war that humanity had never fought was over. No shots had been fired, no ships had been destroyed, no territory had been conquered. But the Galactic Council had lost something far more valuable than any military defeat could have cost them. They had lost their absolute authority over the minds and hearts of their member species. And humanity had gained something worth more than any military victory. They had proven that sometimes the greatest triumphs come not from the strength of your weapons, but from the power of your ideas to set others free. The galaxy would never be the same again. The questions had been asked, the ideas had been planted, and the seeds of freedom were growing in soil that had been barren for 1,000 years. No force in the universe could put that knowledge back in the box or make those questions unasked. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to think for itself, and that lesson could never be unlearned.